archive purposes for future viewing. If any member or any officer has any issues with tech today, could they please contact Democratic Services? And could you please, when on screen, if you wish to speak, could you please put your camera on and speak on camera, please, so that the members of the public that are viewing can actually see who's actually speaking. And if you could also raise your hand using the raise your hand function, or if your raise your hand function isn't working, obviously when you're on screen, you can raise your hand on screen. Thank you all. I'd like to hand over to the chair now, Councillor Sefynianum. Councillors, you're muted.
Yes, sorry, yeah. I was muted. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for that, Karen. If we just run through the beginning of the agenda first, and then there are a couple of changes later, which I'll come to. So do we have any apologies?
Chair, I have no apologies. I don't know if any member has any apologies, but I can see Councillor Good is now come on to the committee as well.
Great, thank you. And can we agree the last minutes for the 27th of September?
Yep.
Yeah. Perfect. And finally, are there any declarations of interest? We haven't received any, I don't think.
I haven't received any, Chair, so I would take the silence as there aren't any.
Great. So if we move on to our report, Helen or Matt, I think the budget underspend, are we bringing that forward to item number 4, or is it item number 5 now?
So the underspend report, Chair, we were going to introduce during the course of the overview and update report. So the next agenda item is the update report. But
Great.
when I pass to Matt shortly to pick up the Q2 monitoring, then he will deal with the underspend paper at that point rather than it being dealt with later.
Perfect, and that makes sense. The other thing just to mention to members is that you will have been expecting a presentation in agenda item 2, agenda item 5, but we're going to put that forward to next March now, because I know people will be keen to have a look at the budget and have a proper discussion on that. So we thought if we push that back, that would give us more time, because it is quite a packed agenda today. So if I hand over to you, Helen, for the first item number 4 on the agenda. So this is our overview and update report.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. And with that in mind, I will take a quicker walk through this paper, if that's okay with everyone, conscious that we have got a lot to cover towards the end of the agenda. So just taking you briefly through the human resources section, starting at 2.1, and this will be a familiar format for you, looking at sickness absence that is elevated compared to what we have experienced in the same quarter last year and the year before. However, a lot of that is due to long-term sickness absence, which we've spoken about previously, and also a change in the way that sickness is recorded within the Vale of Glamorgan, and that relates to notification of COVID-19 sickness. 2.2, a little bit about recruitment, continues to be challenging, but we have had some recent successes, including a good news story. We have recently made 2 appointments to vacant posts, which have been given to officers who are returning to the service, having had spells with other authorities. I mentioned last time we met about a staff survey, specific SRS staff survey, and we've now had opportunity to analyse the results of that, and you'll see that there's some really good feedback which I've itemised in 2.5, some really nice themes emerging there. some areas that we need to give some attention to, and we're now developing an action plan to deal with that. A couple of warning signs as well. It comes as no surprise. Officers are working very, very hard, and some of the free text messages in the survey responses spoke about workloads and using the phrase burnout on a number of occasions. So we're very, very mindful of that and keeping a close eye on that. So I'm turning the page now to 2.7, Chair, which is the financial position for Q2. And at this point, I'll pass over to Matt, if I may.
Great, Matt, over to you.
Morning, everyone. As we've highlighted last time we met, the services experienced some spending pressures. And as you'll see from the report, they amount to 273k. Two real components to those pressures. Firstly, and this is common along the public sector and neighbouring authorities as well, when we've been budgeting for pay awards for the current financial year, we certainly didn't budget at the level that they've come through with a flat 1925 increase across the board for local government, which is the equivalent of about a 6-7% increase in pay. So that's put pressure on the 1975. I should have just said 1925, didn't I? And then on top of that, as previously reported, there are some unbudgeted operational costs, additional costs due to the seizure of 80 horses that occurred during the period as well. So we've been, as a service, discussing ways to actually bridge that gap and balance the budget at year end. And this is where it ties in a little bit to the underspend report that we've just mentioned at the head of the meeting. So in order to balance the budget in the current year, it's proposed that we use 170k of the underspend of the 363k underspend from 21-2, and that alongside that we make use of existing special reserves. So that's the air quality equipment reserve, legal fees and body cameras reserves, which total 105k. So collectively, those measures would bring us in at a balanced budget position at year end. So that's the elements that were in this report, and that naturally runs over into the 21-2 underspend report. So to complete the picture, and we'll probably have to go to the recommendations in that report after this one to agree these proposals. But we had a 363k underspend at the end of last year. We had put forward proposals at outturn to invest that in staffing and look at apprentices going forward, but we need to have a change of plans. So Cardiff have asked for 50k of the underspend to be returned to them, and to effect that, we actually need to do that on an equalised basis. So that would mean returning 104k to Bridgend and 39k to the Vale of Glamorgan. So that's 193k of the 363, and then that would leave 170k of the 21-2 underspend. And as I've just said, that will go towards meeting the in-year budget pressures alongside the use of the reserves. So that's the proposal, and I hope that's fairly clear.
Thanks, Matt. Are there any specific questions from Matt on that report? Look at that, Matt. And thanks for coming in, because I know you've been ill, Matt. So thank you very much.
Right. Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Get off.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Helen, are we going back to you for the remainder of that report?
Yes, if we may, Chair. So
sorry, Karen, shall I take the recommendations at the end for this?
Yes, Chair. Yes.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'll pick up, Chair, at 2.8, which is performance monitoring. And again, with time constraints in mind, don't intend to go through the tables of performance in any detail this morning. They're there in the packs. And of course, if members have any questions, then I and the operational managers will be able to answer those questions. But suffice to say, it's been another challenging quarter. We've spoken previously about our levels of food inspection performance, food standards and food hygiene, and we've spoken about the way that we're working with the FSA, Food Standards Agency, to comply with the recovery plan, which will is moving authorities back from the backlog position as a result of the COVID pandemic back onto the usual programme. Christina has recently had some conversations. We're in dialogue with the Food Standards Agency, specifically looking at the unique pressures on the service given the makeup of our area. So we're very much in dialogue with the FSA and working with them to make sure that we are achieving just as much as we can. You will notice there are some areas of red in the tables for performance, but that is, as we've explained before, we are complying with the recovery plan rather than those traditional metrics. So more than happy to take any questions on performance at this stage, if there are any.
No, that's good.
That does sound good, lovely. So moving on to 2.10, this is where we, again, just very briefly, will guide you through some of the areas of work, just to highlight some of these strategic themes. So the first area that we've highlighted some work under is that of improving public health. So I'm going to pass to Christina now, if I may, and she will talk you through the highlights of that section.
Thanks, Helen, and morning, everybody. And in the interest of speed, I'll go as absolutely as fast as I possibly can here. And much of the information that I have put into this report is for noting only. So we'll take questions from you should you want to ask any. So the theme of improving public health, the first paragraph there, 2.11, is really a reminder for you that, of course, SRS is still very much working in the regional setting element, that looking after the care homes, high risk settings in relation to COVID-19. We still remain, that still remains a focus to us. We're still there in terms of looking at incidents of spread of COVID-19. So just a gentle reminder there. Moving on to 2.12, we every year as a health and safety enforcement authority, we are required to complete a return to the health and safety executive. That is namely the LA1 return, where we are required to focus on detail as to the enforcement actions and the type of interventions we've undertaken for that financial year. Now, in some of my spare time, I chair the All Wales Health and Safety Expert Panel meeting, and unfortunately the HSC this year, last year, weren't allowing us to count our enforcement actions in relation to COVID-19 on that report, which, as you can imagine, that took up a lot of our time for the previous 2 years. So we were very, very keen in ensuring the HSE board were fully recognising the work the local authorities did in terms of COVID-19 enforcement. So we've attached at Appendix 3 our report in terms of detail of the narrative provided, the sheer volume of work work and unprecedented work really that regulatory services across Wales, but obviously in SRS were having to conduct. And so that report is there for noting, for information purposes for you. A little bit of reminder of the hard work that was undertaken. And again, happy to take any questions on that. But that report is being used as part of the COVID inquiry in terms of activity and timeline, which is pleasing to note. Staying on the subject of health and safety, you'll be aware that in terms of health and safety work, we don't carry out inspections. We do interventions as part of our work based on the intelligence and provided, and that those areas of key priority identified by the HSE. Spa and hot tubs were a focus for one project. Particularly in terms of lockdown, of course, COVID-19 made staycations very popular. People were staying in the area, and of course going to those sort of country type premises with the use of spa and hot tubs. So the service undertook a intervention project in relation to that. And again, just for noting purposes, and happy to take any questions, the report details the non-compliances found in that area. You'll note that documented risk assessments were an issue, and of course the report highlights some of the sort of communicable disease type issues that can be associated with those type of facilities. So again, just for noting only, just to flag some of the work that we are doing in the service. And lastly, in terms of my update, I just provide an update there in terms of special procedures in 2.20. This was the presentation that was due to be conducted to you today. So we'll refer that now to the next joint committee. So we'll give you a proper, fully informative update in relation to how that affects us in terms of the new licensing regime and the new enforcement measures as a result. But again, paragraphs there for information purposes only. It will mean, as usual, lots of increased work for the service. However, the provisions of the Act and the purpose of it really does support us in terms of our enforcement measures and, of course, bringing up practices and ensuring that these type of services provided are, of course, up to standard. So a whistle-stop tour from me, and apologies, but again, happy to take any questions from you, but really that information is there for noting today only.
No, and that's really brilliant, Christine. And actually, if you're reading Appendix 3 on the enforcement on the COVID, is absolutely amazing. That's just, that's really, really amazing work. So you should all be very proud of that. So, thank you very much for that. And I do apologise about the presentation today, but I think we'll have more time next time to do, to look at that in more detail. Do any other members have any specific questions? No. Thanks, Christina. Thanks for that. Helen, back to you.
Very briefly, Chair, I'm going to ask Will now to pick up the report from 2.24, and then it will be Jason after Will from 2.31.
Brilliant. Will, over to you.
Thanks, Helen. So continuing the theme, very brief update for me for committee on some work SRS are undertaking in relation to energy efficiency in the private rented sector. So for over a decade, it's been a legal requirement to have an EPC or Energy Performance Certificate in rented properties. And EPCs rate the energy efficiency in a property from A to G, with A being the most efficient and G being the least efficient. And since April 2020, landlords and agents shouldn't be renting properties that have an EPC rating of less than E. So if members want to turn to the report at 2.26, the report shows the data, the latest data that we've had for the SRS region in categories F, G, and those which have no rating. Now, initially, SRS has put together a programme to contact owners and agents of F&G rated properties to remind them of their legal duties, and also to signpost them to possible funding streams that are available from Welsh Government and other sources to improve properties. So we've taken experience from elsewhere, from some authorities who've had a bit of grant funding from Welsh Government to take this work forward. And this seems to suggest that the approach of signposting and acting as a resource for agents and landlords has been successful in improving the rating of categories in the private rented sector. Although, of course, we do reserve the right, should we need to take enforcement action for those who refuse to engage. So we're utilising a recently produced All Wales toolkit to guide our approach. And we're also currently exploring grant funding possibilities for the SRS to assist in resourcing this work. So in due course, we hope to be able to report back to each member authority with some key PIs, and these will be around the improvement in properties and a reduction in carbon tonnage, reduction in energy use, and hopefully savings for tenants and landlords. And just to finish, it's worth noting that Welsh Government estimate that 98% of lower income households are in fuel poverty, and the difference in heating costs between, say, an E and a G rated property are significant. So this work will hopefully also contribute to that agenda as well. So happy to take any questions there, Chair, before I hand over to Jason.
I've got a quick question, Will.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Dan, you go first. Councillor Diath.
Are you sure? I'm happy for you to.
No. Go for it. No,
Okay,
I'm speaking already.
Well, thank you. Well, that was really useful. It's some really important work you're out there doing. Just two quick questions, if I may. I mean, looking at the chart, I mean, in terms of properties with no rating, in Cardiff, there's almost 7,000, which is a huge amount. So presumably a lot of that is because those people haven't declared their energy status via RentSmart. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's one of the things we need to drill into, because it was a surprise to me, but it works out just around 15% of the PRS in Cardiff, which is over 40,000. Yeah. And it's similar across the other areas as well, actually. We think there's a combination of factors. One is data cleansing. So the data isn't correct, and that might be a quick win really in showing some improvement. Maybe people haven't registered, or they're older properties where they haven't declared. So we're not quite certain, but we think a large component of that, yes, is the data needs to be updated. And certainly, I mentioned authorities who've done a little bit more work on this through some grant funding they've received, and that was their finding as well. So we're assuming the same thing will be happening with the SRS.
Is there any way to penalise landlords who don't declare their ratings? It's created a huge job of work for us. Is there any consequence?
Well, there are consequences under the Act, and we've got a range of enforcement measures. They can range from fixed penalty notices. And there are other issues as well with the Renting Homes Act, for instance, which is more about the tenant's ability to take action. I think we need to tread a balance here. We want to, the ultimate aim of this is to improve where we can the EPC rating of properties that are in those categories. There are exemptions under the Act, so they can range from it being overly expensive. There are other exemptions, a list of exemptions that landlords can claim. But the actual works to improve the rating are fairly minimal in some cases. They could be looking at changing the windows, the doors, a bit of insulation. There is money available to landlords and agents for new boilers being fitted under the NEST scheme. So we hope initially that engagement will be sufficient to take action to raise those ratings in those properties. But obviously, if people don't engage, or we find that people, you know, aren't interested in taking that action, then yes, we can penalise them.
Sure, good. One final question: Are we trying to tackle these properties on an individual basis, or are we going to landlords who own 20 properties and saying, look, can we see all the ratings for your, you know, and trying to do it in batches?
So what we have is we've added, or we're in the process of adding quite a bit of information to our data, the SRS page, you know, our web page. And what we have is we've, in the process, using the toolkit and some experience from other authorities who've done this work, we're drafting some letters that we intend to issue to all of the properties that we have this information on. And that will be the first step of engagement. So it'll be to contact those landlords where we know, or agents where we know properties are coming up with FG on a rating. So that is the way that we intend to take this forward.
Okay, well, can I just get one final question?
Yeah.
So if I'm a landlord, I get this letter, I ignore it, I'm not interested, I think, oh, you know, sod this. What's the ultimate penalty we can
well, the penalties under the Act, you can have fixed penalty notice. I'd have to check the actual fine, but there are also implications in relation to withholding rent, for instance, in situations where your property is not of a suitable standard. So I probably need to come back to you with a fuller answer on that. But there are consequences under the Act if you don't comply.
Yeah, no, it's general.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. I think Councillor Dieth asked some of the questions that I was going to ask. Although I suppose, so just the 2 points that I would ask for a bit of clarification about, and you did touch upon this already, Will, is really looking behind those figures, because as Councillor Dieth said, that, you know, 7,000 in Cardiff, but, you know, 900 in the Vale and 700 odd in Bridgend of kind of zero rating, of no rating.
No.
I mean, they are high, and I know you touched on this, but do we have any data on whether people are deliberately ignoring the fact that they need to have an EPC, or do you think this is just, you know, can't afford it, can't, you know, have no idea that's what they're meant to be doing because they're not going through an agency, for example, to rent the accommodation?
I can't say categorically, Councillor, but I feel that it's more likely that is the case, the latter situation, and certainly I can only draw on our experience that we've had speaking to other authorities, that once they've actually started contacting properties agents, landlords, that, you know, the data has quickly changed as people have updated the register. So it's probably more the latter, if I'm honest.
So then the other issue was, you talked about grants in terms of getting grant funding for enforcement. So we talking about grants from Welsh Government in terms of working in partnership with them? Well,
there are a number of different strands, and Helen may wish to come in at this point because she's been leading on this. But yes, there are some grants that are available to local authorities that we can bid for to enable us to take this work forward. And I think, yes, ultimately, I think it does come within Welsh Government's purview. But if I'm wrong there, Helen, please feel free to chip in.
I mean, I think the questions on this were important just in terms of, you know, we, you know, the Vale and Cardiff and Bridgend, we've all declared a climate emergency. So it is really important in terms of housing and the environment that we get, you know, that we get it right, isn't it? Sorry, Helen, over to you.
So I was just going to come in on that point. It's the BEIS, so the UK government department, which has been leading on this. As Will says, there are other opportunities for us to bid for some funding for this, and we're always very good at finding those. But I think it's fair to say the BEIS, UK government, is the leading department.
So I think Jason next.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, so just on the other key theme here, which is supporting the local economy. So just some update on some of the work we've been leading on over the last quarter, really, and some really positive news in terms of the increase of our primary authority partnerships. So these are our sort of legal partnerships with retailers or manufacturers, where we give assured advice in relation to environmental health and trading standards work. So took on a new partnership with Cadwallers, who are an ice cream and sort of coffee shop nationally across Wales, and I think they've now got premises in England as well. So we've given them some primary authority assured advice in relation to allergens and other trading standards advice, and we're in final negotiations with 2 other partners, and we will hopefully be confirming those and getting those signed off early in 2023. And we're also in final negotiations with a national retailer to increase our PA responsibilities with them quite significantly. So once those talks are concluded and we've agreed that, we can give a committee an update on that. So I don't want to sort of go into too much detail on who that is with at the minute until it's all finalised. Just some of the other work we've been doing then is in terms of issuing trading standards advice to a national retailer on the labelling of their mints, and then other waste that they then send off for animal feed. And we've also been undertaking work with partners on allergen policies and water trading standards policies and food hygiene training procedures. We've also been continued with our training that we provide to local businesses, because we do provide fully accredited training on food safety courses from level 1 to level 4. So in Q2, we offered 7 training courses and a total of 57 candidates obtaining the relevant accreditations based on the level that they undertook. We've increased sort of how we are sort of communicating and offering advice more widely using our Ask the Regulator podcast, which is on Spotify and other platforms. And in Q2, we did an important piece on the Buying with Confidence scheme. This is a scheme where local traders sign up to that, and we offer assured advice to those businesses and review and provide them appropriate advice on how they could perform with customers and their contracts. So we had one of those businesses attend that. And we also worked with Trading Standards Wales for Trading Standards Week and had detailed podcasts on each of the days on the key themes over the week in October that National Trading Standards Week was. And the success of these podcasts has been recognised. We were nominated for a National Community Radio Awards for Podcast of the Year. Unfortunately, we didn't win it, but it was great to be nominated, and the team attended the awards ceremonies and did some good partnership working there, really. And just finally then touching on the accreditation of our UCAS Metrology Lab, which is based at the County Hall in Cardiff. This is the only UCAS accredited lab in Wales for metrology. And again, the audit was really successful. There were some minor corrective actions that had to be undertaken, which really was just the checking in and acceptance of our equipment when it goes off for calibration. All those corrective actions have now been implemented by the team, and overall the conclusion of the audit was the continuation of the UCAS accreditation and for the standard for our mass calibration. Just touching on the final key theme here, which is the safeguarding the vulnerable. SRS took part in National Safeguarding Week, which was on the 14th of November. And we just highlighted there some of the work we undertook over this week, really. So presentations were given to a number of volunteers at Age Cymru, Hope Advocacy, and we also undertook some work at the Princess of Wales Hospital, giving advice of looking out for vulnerable adults. Fraud and scams awareness training was undertaken with hairdressers. Again, this is a good area where sort of vulnerable victims, elderly attending hairdressers, can be educated and any sort of concerns that are raised by their clients. We ask the hairdressers to report it directly to us so we can investigate any potential scams that are being reported in the community. We took a road trailer operation in conjunction across with South Wales Police. And we did a further podcast on safeguarding. So it was a really successful week, and ensuring that we provided our safeguarding for the vulnerable as part of that national week. So I'll take any questions on any of those that were mainly for noting.
Now, Jason.
Yes.
Thanks for that. Are there any specific questions for Jason from any members? Thank you very much, Jason.
Right.
Helen, I think we've covered that report. So shall I move to the recommendations for that?
Yes, Chair, there's just one last thing that I was going to mention at 2.37 really quickly. It's the update on enforcement activity, and in Appendix 5, again, all the information is there on the cases, lots and lots of variety there. Again, not so many cases in terms of number, but we're waiting. We think we're going to have a bumper crop next time we report because of the delays still in the court system, but a great variety in terms of the areas of work, types of legislation covered there. So if there are any questions on that today or at any point in the future, more than happy to go into detail on that. Of course, there has been one very recent case which I notified everyone of yesterday. We've got a 12-month prison sentence for a rogue builder. That will be reported fully for the next joint committee meeting.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. So are there any questions for Helen before we move to the recommendations? So we're being asked to note the contents of Helen, the first report on at the overview and update report at item 4 on the agenda. But we're also, because Matt has covered this, on item number 6 on the agenda, which is the 2021-22 budget underspend. I'm asking members to agree that the recommendations within that report as outlined by Matt. Have I covered that correctly, Helen?
Yes. Yeah.
So are we all agreed on that? If I don't have any dissent, I'm taking it that we're agreeing. So I think that's agreed, Helen.
Just to mention, Chair, Councillor Michael has also joined us now.
Thank you.
Yes, okay.
Welcome, Councillor Michael.
Sorry, better late than never, internet problems.
That's okay. So we're going to item number 5 on the agenda, having covered 6 with Matt earlier, and that's about fees and charges, Helen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is a regular feature of the December Joint Committee meeting. We bring this report to you to consider fees and charges for the coming financial year, 23-24. Within your packs, you'll see that the proposed fees are set out in an annex. And just to clarify, that the annex contains 2 parts. The first part is the fees and charges, which are within the area of responsibility of the Joint Committee, within the remit of Joint Committee. Part 2 of that schedule of fees and charges is there for information. It's all the other fees and charges that we're obliged to deal with through the course of the year, but the level at which they are set isn't within the remit of Joint Committee. They're set by Welsh Government, they're set by UK Government, they're set by the various agencies. They're there for completeness. So part 1 of the annex is what we're considering today. And consistently, when we present this report at the December Joint Committee meeting, we always we have reference to the CPIH rate of inflation as it stood in the previous August. And by looking at that, we can determine the level at which we should be increasing our fees and charges. Now, in August 2022, the CPIH rate of inflation was standing at 8.6%. And just for reference, this time last year, we were talking about a 3% increase, and the year before that, just a 0.5% increase. And I think that year we didn't actually make an increase at all, given the circumstances at that time. So clearly, 8.6% is consistent with that anchor that we always use, which is the August prior CPIH rate of inflation. So that 8.6% has been applied to the fees and charges that you see in part 1 of the annex. And one other point to mention, you'll see in the report, we speak about the way we have, since the services come together, in 2015, we have harmonised fees and charges. So there were 3 separate regimes, as you can imagine, of the 3 authorities coming together to provide the service. We've harmonised those as far as we could, but there was always a difficulty in completely harmonising the animal related licensing fees. Jason has done some great work on this, and Will, and we've now got through that obstacle, and we are for the first time able to harmonise right across the area. So if someone is applying for a license for a riding establishment, then they would pay the same fee for that license, regardless where in the SRS region they are based. So all of that is set out in the annex, and obviously happy to take any questions on any of that.
Do any members have any specific questions on that? Yes, there is a question. Rhys, Councillor Good.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, Helen, in terms of sort of where we are in the budget cycle, etc., and bearing in mind that I think no one would thank us for increasing charges by an amount and then next year having to increase them at a far higher rate. And I've wondered, has there been any modelling done to increase it by 10.5%? I know my office in Bridgend are certainly looking at inflation at sort of a base rate of 10.5 rather than 8. So I just wondered if there'd been any modelling done on that and what difference that could make to the SRS budget generally.
Yes, we haven't modelled the higher rate because we have always consistently applied this CPIH for the previous August. The other thing we have to bear in mind as well is I guess inflation is coming down slightly now. From the high that we saw just a couple of months ago. And I have highlighted it in the report, the fact that because these are licensing regimes, we have to be very, very careful that we are recovering cost, but we're not seen to be making a profit or generating a surplus. So it is quite a fine line. We've always taken this CPIH for the previous August as the standard. I feel that is consistent. But obviously, if members feel that we should revisit that and do some further modelling on a different rate, then of course we can do that. My concern would be that we might be challenged because we've departed from the approach that we've taken in previous years. And as I say, there is that slight issue, or more than a slight issue, the danger, I guess, that we could be seen to be creating a surplus.
Okay, thank you, Helen.
Are there any other questions? I mean, as you know, I suppose it's a fair point, isn't it, in terms of you know, looking at our fees. Is it something we could consider, if not for this year, next year, in terms of modelling? Although who knows what inflation is going to be like then?
Yes, absolutely. And for next year, because there's some new animal licensing legislation, we will be doing a full review of the precise cost of providing those particular licenses. So, and that's something that we keep under review year on year with the different regimes.
Okay. So I'm asking members today to agree the recommendations in this report so that we can set the fees for next April. So are members happy to go ahead with that?
Yep.
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 Great. There you go, Helen.
Lovely, thank you.
So moving to the next item, which is our budget for 2023 to 24. Now this is part 1 and part 2 item. So Helen, if I let you do the introduction part 1 and then we may be moving to part 2 almost immediately. Is that okay, Karen?
That's perfectly fine, Chair, as long as we do get approval from the committee that we move into part 2, just the housekeeping bit. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll be really brief. So this is agenda item 7, which is the report for part 1 of the agenda, where we're looking at shared regulatory services budget for 2023-24. And there is some background in this report which is replicated in the report that we're proposing is dealt with under part 2 of the agenda. I won't go into detail on that now, but suffice to say it talks about the journey that the shared service has been on since its creation in terms of its financing. The recommendation of this part 1 paper is for members to note the content of the report with a view to decisions being made on the shared regulatory services budget 2023-24 report to be introduced under part 2 of the meeting agenda, and as Karen says, for agreement that is dealt with under part 2.
Thank you, Helen. So can I have members' agreement to the recommendations, the recommendation in part 1 of this that Helen's already mentioned, and then can I also have agreement that we can move to that people are happy for us to move to part 2 to discuss the substantive part of the report?
I'll move.
Agreed.
And I'll move for part 2.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Okay, Chair, we had a mover and a seconder. What I'll do now, then I'll stop recording, but if you could bear with us, we've got to now pull the stream down from the internet, and my colleague will let me know when that's been done before we move into